Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you are in the country. Welcome to our webinar updates on the final days of the 118th Congress. We wanted to be sure to provide you with some information about what's happening over the next 8 days, as well as give a preview to what may be coming in the months and years ahead. So without further ado, we'll get going here. Um, we'll start with some basic housekeeping while people are still joining. For those of you who are new to Schoolhouse Connection, we are a national organization working to overcome homelessness through education. We work on the full spectrum of child development and learning from preschool through post-secondary, working in partnership with providers and schools and families and youth all over the country. You can find out a lot more about us on our website. I'll also share that for this particular webinar, we are recording. It will be available afterwards on our website. We do also have the PowerPoint slides that we'll put in the chat for you and also will be emailed to you after the webinar. And lastly, to say that we welcome questions. If you're here, we know that your time is precious and you come to a webinar to get information, but you also come to a webinar to get your questions answered. So we don't have a crystal ball. We can't predict the future, but we'll do our very best to answer questions as they come up. And we'll also have a time in the webinar to answer questions. So if you would please put the questions in the Q&A panel, we'll be able to track those and to answer them as they come along. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Darla.
Thank you, Barbara. Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Darla Bardine. I am the Executive Director of the National Network for Youth. I use she, her pronouns. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the National Network for Youth, we are on a mission to transform systems so that no young person in America experiences homelessness. We're a national membership organization, so we do represent over 300 youth homelessness service providers across the country. We also partner with young people with lived expertise of homelessness. We do federal policy advocacy. We partner with youth and young adults, and we also support communities on the ground. And with that, I will hand it to TJ.
Thanks, Darla. My name is TJ Lucas, and I'm the Senior Manager for Federal Policy at Schoolhouse Connection. Today, the webinar is going to start with an overview of the current Congress, which, believe it or not, only has 9 working days left. Then we will transition to the new Congress to go over the next 2 years. There will be an implications of the 2024 election slide, and we will discuss some issues for congressional action later on. Federal advocacy action, advocacy tips and training, and resources will also be discussed. Right now, Congress has a really big to-do list before the end of the year. They've got to finalize an FY25 2025 budget. There is a potential for a disaster relief supplemental package that is to be put together for Hurricanes Helene and Milton, and potentiality of the Runaway and Homeless Youth Trafficking and Prevention Act, as well as Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. What we know right now is that the federal budget, which runs from October 1st through September 30th of each year, is already 3 months into FY 2025. Congress is set once again to punt that later into next year, potentially up until March of 2025. This will give President Trump and the new Congress, which will be sworn in on January 3rd, the power over the budget process for the remainder of the FY 2025 budget. Some good news is that the McKinney-Vento Education for Homeless Children and Youth Act funds and the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act funds are not expected to be impacted by the CR. Right now, we imagine that they will be level funded. One important consideration is if Congress does not get this budget completed by April 1st, there is automatic cuts that will go into effect due to the budget caps agreement that was agreed to earlier this Congress. One question that some of you may be having is what will the legacy of the American Rescue Plan Homeless Children and Youth Funds? As you will recall, this was an $800 million investment that was the result of the advocacy from Schoolhouse Connection and many of you on this call here today. We are in the final wrapping up of the ARP HCY funds, which had to be obligated by September 30th of 2024. And to help defend against the cuts and elimination of EHCY funding, we need to show the impact of ARP HCY and make the case for why there needs to be continued targeting investments in homeless students. If you are a liaison or fulfill those roles in your school district, please fill out the survey that is linked here. It will also be linked in the chat as well as the email sent following up. This information will allow us to go to the new Congress to take information about all of the innovative and unique ways that you were able to assist children and youth experiencing homelessness. One of the next items that Congress is considering right now is a disaster relief package for Hurricanes Helene and Milton. We are currently advocating for supplemental dollars to be implemented for EHCY with the flexible uses of funds that were outlined in the American Rescue Plan Homeless Children and Youth Funds. Earlier this year, we joined 14 national organizations to sign a letter asking that these funds be included in any disaster supplemental package that materializes. Unfortunately, we do know that there are already thousands of students that are experiencing homelessness due to the recent disasters, natural disasters of Hurricane Helene and Milton, from Florida all the way up to North Carolina, Virginia, South Carolina, Georgia as well. And I will kick it over to Trinity.
Thank you, TJ. Hello, everyone. My name is Trinity Maddock, and I'm the Policy Associate at National Network for Youth. And I'm going to talk to you a bit about some progress in the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA. So our friends over at the National Youth Employment Coalition are working very hard on getting this passed by the end of the year. And NM4Y is part of this coalition and very much support, the work they're doing on this bill. So WIOA offers federal funding for a number of workforce development and employment programs for both adults and youth. And some of those programs are ones you're probably familiar with, including Job Corps and Youth Build. So the Stronger Workforce for America Act was passed in the House this spring, and this bill reauthorizes and updates the current WIOA. And in order to get this bill done quickly, so by the end of the year, the House and Senate have come up with a negotiated version of that House bill, which still includes the updates that are most relevant to our work with young people experiencing homelessness. So some of those updates include changing the term out of school youth that is currently used to opportunity youth, which explicitly includes young people experiencing homelessness or those involved in the foster care system. It also directs the state and local workforce development boards to conduct an analysis of their opportunity youth population. So in order to get WIOA funding, states and localities have to create these workforce development boards. And the updated WIOA bill basically asks these boards to be more aware of the OY opportunity youth in their area so they can better target workforce services to these individuals. Another update is creating the Youth Apprenticeship Readiness Grant Program, which will just increase the number of young people who can participate in apprenticeship or pre-apprenticeship programs. And then finally, super importantly, this bill will allow young people who have or are experiencing homelessness or who were involved in foster care to enter a WIOA program right away based on a self-attested status. And then from there, the program staff has 40 days to confirm that status of, experiencing homelessness or whatever, using the same criteria, the same process as financial aid administrators. So this is really great. It allows young people in need to enter these services right away without them having to worry about, I need this document, I need that document, and puts the onus on the program staff to help the young person get everything they need to get together. So again, advocates are working on getting this bill passed by the end of this year. We really hope that will happen since there are a number of updates that we are very, very supportive of. With that, I'll turn it over to, I think, Barbara. Oh no, it's still me. Just kidding. Runaway and Homeless Youth and Trafficking Prevention Act. So this is National Networks for Youth, kind of big bill. This reauthorizes and updates the current Runaway and Homeless Youth Act program, which offers these different grants to local youth homelessness service providers, as well as funds the 1-800 Runaway hotline. So RHYTPA makes a number of updates to the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act, but some of the top ones here include expanding services to young people who have experienced trafficking, including provisions to prevent discrimination, to ensure that all young people have access to services. It will increase the length of stay in basic center programs, so programs that serve minors, from 21 days to 30 days or longer if the state law allows, and increases the allowable age for transitional living programs. So this is longer term housing, currently for 16 to 22-year-olds, but RHYTPA would increase that to include 25-year-olds. So you would exit when you're 26. And then finally, it increases overall funding for the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act and increases the grant award amounts kind of based on the level of funding that the program receives that year. Now, RHYTPA has been introduced in both the House and the Senate. The House has been kind of looking to the Senate to move on this first. So at National Network for Youth, we've been working hard with members of the Senate Judiciary Committee to get it out of committee and hopefully attach to something by the end of this year. If that doesn't happen, then reintroduction next year. So we have linked here our Take Action page for RHYTPA, where you can get a ton of info, fact sheets, everything about the bill. And if you're interested, fill out our Take Action form to send an email of support to all your legislators. Alternatively, the second link here is a draft letter of support that you could email directly to any contacts you have in your legislators' offices. There's still time to show support for this bill, so we'd really appreciate you taking the time to do any of that. And if you have any questions about RHYTPA, WIOA, feel free to send me an email. And now I'm going to turn it over to Barbara.
Thank you very much, Trinity. So again, there's a lot that's going to be happening in the next 9 days, and our organizations will be reporting out on that, both in terms of the overall funding, continuing resolution, and these other pieces of legislation. But we also want to be providing a look ahead and what we need to be prepared for and informed about and ready to do over the next 2 years. So we will have a trifecta, which is complete Republican control over all three, the House, the Senate, and the White House. However, there's a very slim majority in the House of Representatives, and that's going to make things trickier and more difficult to pass legislation, and may actually end up creating more polarization and challenges. We do know that several of the largest and most prominent champions for children and youth experiencing homelessness are returning to Congress. Either they weren't up for re-election or they won their re-election bid. So that is very good news, and something that we are grateful for. And of course, we want to have new champions and more champions specifically for children and youth who are experiencing homelessness. We'll also say now, and you'll hear us say again, that now is not the time to turn away. Now is not the time to unplug. Now is the time to tune in and make your voices heard, because we have lots of new members coming in, and good policies are informed policies, and there's a lot that we can do and a lot that national groups cannot do by themselves. So without further ado, we're going to dive into some of the issues that we know are before us. I mentioned before that the Schoolhouse Connection works prenatal through post-secondary. So we're going to present on early childhood, K-12, higher education, then we're all going to talk about housing and homeless issues more generally. What do we know about the hot topics? Generally, for all of these areas, we're very concerned in 2025 and beyond about budget cuts. Many campaign promises about reducing the size of the federal funding, the federal government. So generally, we will be in a defensive posture with early childhood funding as well as the others. I will say that for of the various areas that we work in, there is more bipartisan agreement and consensus around early childhood issues than, for example, K-12 or higher ed. So that's a good thing, but nonetheless, there are many concerns around overall funding. Childcare affordability is definitely going to be a topic, and other concerns to other programs that affect expectant parents and young children experiencing homelessness. Within that, for SHC, we're focusing obviously on preserving the funding, but also there are really specific and important requirements within federal early childhood development programs on homelessness, and we need to preserve them as well as the data that brings visibility to early childhood homelessness. So more to come on early childhood homelessness. We'll be launching a new policy agenda along with some prominent early childhood organizations next year. But generally speaking, it's going to be about defense and about preserving the good policies that we have, as well as looking for some specific new angles where there is bipartisan support. On the next slide, K-12 education, pre-K-12 education before the new Congress. This is where we expect that there will be the most activity. I'm sure if you're following the news, you know it was a campaign promise to eliminate the Department of Education or greatly reduce its role. So to talk about the overall agency and federal role in education, absolutely the budget cuts, discussion and legislative proposals around school choice or school vouchers, the privatization of public education, a Parents' Bill of Rights that we need to watch as well. Where there is bipartisan consensus is around career pathways and career education. So we may see some action there. And of course, just generally at the federal level, a rolling back of DEI initiatives. For us at Schoolhouse Connection and with our partners at the National Network for Youth, there are many of those issues that we care about and we'll be supporting other partners in. But where we are specifically have our unique focus will be defending the McKinney-Vento Act's Education for Homeless Children Youth Program, as well as Title I Part A, the protections for foster youth within that legislation. And where there are bipartisan areas, for example, career pathways, making sure that that legislation prioritizes and removes barriers for homeless and foster youth. We do want to share on the next slide some more specificity about what legislation to dismantle the U.S. Department of Education might look like. So this was legislation that was introduced just a couple weeks ago by Senator Mike Rounds of South Dakota, Returning Education to Our States Act. And if you see any news coverage of this bill, it's generally about dismantling the Department of Education and moving federal education programs to other federal agencies. But what hasn't been covered as much is the actual repeals that this legislation would do. So it repeals federal education programs for which the U.S. Department of Ed has administrative authority. That means McKinney-Vento. That means Title I Part A. That means preschool development blocks. That means many, many education programs that directly serve vulnerable children. So it's not just about reshuffling where federal education programs go. It's also about eliminating many of them, rolling them into a block grant, which then doesn't have any of the protections, any of the mandates to use funding specifically. So not likely that this bill is going to go anywhere in the next 8 days. In fact, it's certainly not going to go anywhere in the next 8 days. It's also true that similar proposals in the previous session of Congress did not go anywhere. And in fact, when it came up in the House, more than 60 House Republicans voted against it. So it would take a lot politically for this to actually happen. But nonetheless, it's something we have to pay attention to. We have an analysis of the bill more specifically on our website that you can read, but will be, again, one of the key pieces for Schoolhouse Connection over the next year. On the next slide, to give you a preview about some of the higher education issues before the new Congress. And here we sort of separated into financial aid and then other higher education issues. So just like with all the other areas, budget cuts, shrinking of financial aid and other key higher education programs will be on the table. There is some bipartisan consensus around short-term Pell, so that Pell Grants can be used for not just for a 4-year degree, but for other career pathways. So there's bipartisan consensus there that may happen, and we'll almost certainly see more congressional oversight of the new FAFSA, just as we have over the past couple years. We will continue to be laser focused on those provisions for homeless and foster youth within the FAFSA, as well as the larger defense work. Within other higher education topics, conversations about student loans, accreditation, particularly for private schools, campus speech. So within that, well, again, we are working in coalition on some of those broader issues with other national higher education group. Our specific focus will be around homeless and foster youth and how they are impacted, and how some of the bipartisan priorities that we've advanced in the past for homeless and foster youth within higher education can also be a part of other higher education conversations. So that's just a look ahead at some of the higher education issues. And now we'll talk about homeless and housing issues. And I think, Darla, you kick this one off.
Yes, thank you, Barbara. So definitely a theme here of what we can anticipate in the new Congress. Definitely budget cuts in general. There's going to be less spending on discretionary domestic programs. So we are anticipating proposed significant proposed budget cuts to federal housing programs. Also, when it comes to Medicaid and the reimbursements there. So some of the things that National Network for Youth and Schoolhouse Connection are going to be working on together, again, like Barbara said, being defensive, really trying to defend funding for key housing programs that we know are helping children, youth, and families experiencing homelessness. We're also going to continue our work to align HUD's definition of homelessness with the McKinney-Vento Education for Children and Youth program and the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act program. And that is primarily through the Homeless Children and Youth Act bill, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. So that bill was introduced this Congress, and we'll be working to ensure that it's reintroduced and hopefully moves through the next Congress as well. And I will pass it to TJ to talk about our other two priorities we'll work on together.
Thanks, Darla. We will be working to amend the student rule to allow unaccompanied homeless youth to be full-time students and live in LIHTC housing. LIHTC stands for Low Income Housing Tax Credit Units, and the Congress is expected to pass a reconciliation package that touches on taxes next year. So we are going to be active early on trying to get that bill passed. There is a bill already introduced called the Housing for Homeless Students Act that is led by Representatives Danny Davis and Representatives Brad Winstrup that has been introduced that would close this loophole. Additionally, we're going to be working on eviction prevention, specifically to incorporate and advance connections with the early care and public schools to be recipients of funds, and for disaggregation of eviction data by age, educating eviction courts about McKinney-Vento and early care. And I will pass it to Barbara to talk about our additional housing priorities.
Thanks, TJ. So one of the many things that we learned about the American Rescue Plan, Homeless Children and Youth Act, is just how powerful it was for public schools, McKinney-Vento liaisons to have the ability to meet emergency housing needs right on the spot. The ability to use ARPHCY funds for motel stays literally saved lives. It kept families off the streets, it kept them safe, and it helped them bridge to longer term housing solutions. So within the next Congress, we will continue to work to make that allowability apply moving forward to the regular McKinney-Vento funding, but more importantly, to make sure that we can find additional flexible funding. This could be a pilot, this could be a smaller piece within appropriations language, but because that was a bipartisan initiative and because we have good data, we think that this is one maybe area of promise in an otherwise very challenging environment. We also are specifically going to be working on similar sorts of smaller solutions within the scheme of things, housing solutions for families with young kids, particularly expectant parents and children under age 3, similar to the emergency housing vouchers that we saw during the pandemic. And then lastly, we worked on legislation that we think is very important that really would foster those partnerships between early childhood, K-12, and housing agencies. So that's another area where at a smaller scale, we may see some consensus and we'll be pushing forward again to bring the early care, education, and housing sectors together.
And some of the things the National Network for Youth is going to be working on, we're going to continue our work on the foster youth to independent vouchers. Many of our youth service providers are having a hard time getting these vouchers for the former foster youth that they're serving. So we're going to be doing more research, really pinpointing where the challenges are. And if there are any regulatory or implementation guidance that's needed, we'll work to advocate for those changes. We're also going to be building out our work on young parent families. So expect to see more work policy work and publications on that topic next year. We're also releasing in March next year an affordable housing for youth publication, and we'll be doing a webinar that will have some of our youth service providers that have developed affordable housing for young people, so that communities can learn how to do that. And with that, I'll pass it back to Barbara.
Okay, so again, thinking about the next 2 years and things that we all need to be paying close attention to is the topic of immigration. We know, and I think everyone's well aware of campaign promises and now plans around deportation, around more restrictions on federal aid, other legal challenges that will very directly impact children, youth, and families who are experiencing homelessness and may create more homelessness. So the action item here is to stay connected to information and to the advocacy organizations that are really leading the charge. We linked here to a great resource if you're working in public education and K-12 sector about what school districts can do to protect immigrant students. There's also great information from the American Immigration Council. Would encourage everyone to sign up. They really have some of the best e-news to keep track of like the changing rules and the changing threats and what can be done about it, as well as our partners at Unidos US. So I think Darla had some specific pieces too to share about this runaway and homeless youth community and immigration and things that we need to be paying attention to.
Yeah, and just from a youth service provider perspective, I know we hear from providers just concerns about potentially ICE coming and trying to deport young people that you're serving, or the fear of any type of guidance making it illegal for homeless youth service providers to serve young people who aren't yet documented. What I would say is nothing has happened yet. Nothing happened previously. So there isn't a precedent from the previous administration that has happened. So it is something we'll be monitoring and letting our providers know, and sharing resources on how you can best support the immigrant youth that you're serving. And now it's still me. Great. So we're shifting a little to something good. So as sober and realistic as we want to be and prepared about what is to come next year from a policy perspective, we did also want to share, look, there are a lot of good things. There's a lot of funding that has gone out this year that will be being spent to do good things on the ground in communities across the country. People will be spending money, learning things, sharing, and doing good work over the next few years. So just to highlight a few, the HUD Youth Homeless Demonstration Program grant, just in October, 14 grants went out, totaling $72 million. So that'll be 2 years of funding where communities are going to be transforming how they're addressing youth and young adult homelessness. There's the Youth Homeless System Improvement Grant money that went out. 51 million in total has gone out to 38 communities. So that work will be ongoing on the ground in communities over the next couple of years. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act, put out the Prevention Demonstration Program grants. So that was 10 youth service providers receive funding totaling $3.4 million. So this grant, this work is going to continue to be happening over the next couple of years. And we'll continue to advocate for this prevention, and we'll continue to learn and advance local community solutions, regardless of what's happening in DC on Capitol Hill. And I will pass it to Trinity.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so Job Corps is a great education and workforce development program for young people that can also provide housing and other supportive services. So super important for young people experiencing homelessness. And as we talked about before, Job Corps is funded through WIOA. So similarly with the WIOA bill, one of those updates is allowing young people to enter the program based on a self-attested status. And that's a great update, but not official across all WIOA programs yet because that bill hasn't passed. But Job Corps recently went ahead and released its own guidance saying, we're going to start doing this for Job Corps. And this is something that Schoolhouse Connection and National Network for Youth have been advocating for a long time. There were a lot of barriers to young people experiencing homelessness entering Job Corps, including obtaining parental consent, signage, documentation, all of that. So now Job Corps is saying that if you have or are experiencing homelessness, trafficking, or have been displaced, then you can self-attest to that and enter Job Corps right away, get housing right away. And then the program staff will actually have 90 days to verify that status. So this is really great guidance. Job Corps also issued this new online portal for young people to apply, just making it way easier for them to enter these great programs. So if you work with any young people and you're trying to get them into Job Corps, definitely check out the guidance and this new portal. Because these updates are live now. So, the WIOA updates aren't official yet until that bill passes, but for Job Corps, it is happening now. The guidance is now. So great news there. And we'll turn it to the next one.
Awesome. And to add some more good news to what has already been shared, earlier this year, the U.S. Department of Education clarified that the Education for Homeless Children and Youth funds would be used for all of the activities outlined in the department's Dear Colleague letter to chief state school officers on September 12th, 2023, which was guidance for the American Rescue Plan Homeless Children and Youth funds. All of the allowable uses except for paying for short-term temporary emergency housing, such as hotel or motels. This is a wonderful example of advocacy and action. And if you have any questions, you can read the clarification on our website.
All right, so I have one question that I will read, and if you do have additional questions for us, we'll take a pause here before we turn to some additional action items. So a question is, in the definition, was there a specific reason for not including young youth involved in the youth justice system? Is that funding already included elsewhere? And I believe this is about RHYA, but it's for Trinity. If you could answer that one.
Yes, I think that one is about the WIOA definition. So the WIOA out of school definition they currently use does include justice involved youth. So really one of the other big reasons to change it to opportunity youth instead of out of school youth is to allow these young people to enter these programs regardless of their school status. So if you're experiencing homelessness, but you're still in school, right now you're not an out of school youth, so you might have difficulties entering these programs. So justice involved youth are still included in that definition.
Thank you very much. And we have another question. How do we sign up to receive U.S. Department of Education Dear Colleague notifications? I haven't been able to find it easily online. It is not easily found online. And so there isn't like a single particular place. For the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education, there is an e-news list, and that is one place that you can go to get updated information. But probably the best way, honestly, is to sign up for Schoolhouse Connections newsletter, because if there's anything related to youth experiencing homelessness, young children, youth in foster care, we will blast it out, and we will make the Department of Education Dear Colleague letters available. We've certainly done that, for example, with FAFSA and the clarifications for homeless youth there. So again, OESC has something on their website. I also think we don't know what's going to happen with the new administration in terms of how much information, what's going to happen to the website. So for that reason too, would encourage you just to sign up to for our newsletters. And we have a link at the last slide about that as well. Let's see, additional questions that may have come in. Just take a pause here. We'll have questions time at the very end as well to see if there's any other questions. Okay, I'm going to keep the questions coming if you have them so we can get to them at the end, but we want to sort of segue into the next section. I think actually, is this a TJ section or is this a Barbara session? It's a Trinity section.
This one's mine.
All right, you get it. Go.
Yeah. So I'm going to just touch briefly on federal agency advocacy before turning it over to the rest of the team to speak more in depth about congressional advocacy. So federal agencies, of course, don't pass laws, but they do issue, as we've been talking about, guidance or regulations that fill in the gaps of these sometimes broad laws that govern them. So these regulations will detail kind of the nitty-gritty of how their programs are going to be implemented. So like the Job Corps guidance, for example. So there's definitely room for advocacy directed towards federal agencies, especially in this regulations realm. Sometimes, as it's noted here, it can be a little more difficult since they're not elected officials, can't really be held accountable in the same way that a congressperson might be. But there are avenues. So anytime an agency wants to make a significant change to a regulation, they must open it up to public comment. So they'll post a notice on federalregister.gov. Anyone can sign up for the alerts for these notices. These alerts are actually very good. And again, you can choose kind of which agency, which office you want notifications for. And then anyone can offer comment on these regulation updates. So that's a major avenue for us. Additionally, as advocates, we can affect change on agencies through legislation. So, advocating for a change to one of the laws that govern the agency. And this work would be done, alongside members of Congress. And finally, just creating and maintaining those positive working relationships with federal agency staff is super important. I know it's something that Schoolhouse Connection and National Network for Youth really value. We want to be these trusted sources of information to federal agencies as they're constantly working to improve and tweak their programs to just ensure as many people as possible are benefiting from the work they're doing. So with that, I'll turn it over to the rest of the team to talk about congressional advocacy.
So I'm going to jump in just real quickly here to make a preface comment about advocacy, which is just to say that there can be a sense of powerless right now. We know a lot of people are very anxious, but nothing is inevitable. And I have seen in my own career 30 years ago when the 104th Congress came in and there was massive work done to eliminate federal education programs, and some federal education programs did go away, that we were able to fight and preserve McKinney-Vento. So just to say that this information that you're going to see in the next couple of slides, even if you can't or you're not comfortable like directly engaging with Congress, there's lots of things you can do, from data sharing and story sharing and all of that. But also we are here to make it as fun and painless as possible. And I want to turn it over to TJ now to talk a little bit more about the advocacy piece, particularly given his experience as a former Hill staffer.
Absolutely. And as Barbara mentioned, I am a former Hill staffer. I worked in the Senate for 6.5 years, covering a host of issues ranging from healthcare, education, to appropriations. And one of the quintessential stories that I go back to is when my former boss met a group of high school students in Southern West Virginia to discuss some issues related to substance use disorder. And many of them shared that they had been impacted either personally or through one of their family members by the opioid epidemic that was ravishing Southern West Virginia. That particular meeting, hearing directly from constituents, was the catalyst for my boss to then come back and not just introduce a piece of legislation to help those students directly, but it launched an awareness of the larger issue that was not just in our state, but happening to many communities across the country. And it ultimately led to the senator introducing or co-sponsoring north of 40 pieces of legislation, really trying to take an ownership and understand from the prevention side to the treatment side, and every which way. And in every single conversation and every single bill introduction, he referenced back to that meeting at the high school with those students and how powerful their stories were. Why do I share that? To let you know that you are the expert in your field. You have the knowledge and information that policymakers need to help the students that you're also serving. And one of the wonderful things about advocacy is that you can do it in a nonpartisan way by simply just educating them about what is happening in your communities, some of the challenges that you're seeing, some of the trends that you're seeing. And oftentimes it's the only way to get a meeting with certain lawmakers is to have somebody from the district that they represent. And as Barbara mentioned, it is going to be critical for you to join us in advocacy efforts as we move forward through the next challenging, as the challenging political climate continues to be the way that it is. And I will pass it over to Darla.
Thank you, TJ. All right, advocacy versus lobbying. Okay, so advocacy is any activity to influence policy. That can be educating a policymaker, providing information, or arguing a cause. For example, you could say, I run a program in your district, and I received the federal Runaway and Homeless Youth Act grant. I received the Basic Center Program grant, and I serve 60 minors experiencing homelessness every year. And 95% of them have a safe exit. 80% of them are safely reunified with their family or another safe adult. So that is providing education, that is providing information. And then you could say, it's critical that we continue to receive this funding because we have a wait list. Year round, we have 30 young people who are waiting to enter our Basic Center program funded with the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act program. So that is education, providing information, kind of highlighting the importance of this existing federal law and the funding that comes through that grant program. Lobbying is an activity that asks the legislator to take a specific position on a specific piece of legislation or urging others. So the National Network for Youth urges others to contact their members of Congress and ask them to co-sponsor the Runaway and Homeless Youth Trafficking Prevention Act. If you, in that same meeting talking about your Runaway and Homeless Youth Act Basic Center Program grant, then said, and I'm asking you to co-sponsor the Runaway and Homeless Youth Trafficking Prevention Act, that would be lobbying, getting to the specific ask, because you would have been asking a policymaker to take a specific position, the position being in support of a specific piece of legislation. And I have another example of advocacy versus lobbying. You're meeting with a legislator or their staff, and you're explaining to them how the families and young people that you're serving do not meet the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, the housing development, their definition of homelessness, but that these children, youth, and families are vulnerable and they're not able to access the help they need because they're not eligible. This is what it looks like in my community. McKinney-Vento homeless liaisons are identifying these children, youth, and families. They're eligible for McKinney-Vento Education for Homeless Children and Youth programs, but that doesn't provide the housing and other support that they need. HUD has billions of dollars to provide housing to people who meet their definition of homelessness. And it would really help if HUD's definition of homelessness was aligned with the McKinney-Vento education definition of homelessness, for example. So that would be advocacy. Lobbying would be, please co-sponsor the Homeless Children and Youth Act. That is a bill, bipartisan legislation that would change HUD's definition of homelessness. So hopefully those examples help explain the difference between advocacy and lobbying. And next slide, we'll talk about, so what if I can't lobby? So we always make sure, check with your, local laws that you're very clear on, the definition of lobbying. So you know where the line is if you are restricted in your ability to lobby. And you can partner with others to make the ask. So often, national organizations like Schoolhouse Connection and the National Network for Youth, we will accompany you to Hill meetings. We'll help you schedule meetings with your elected officials. It can be a virtual meeting, an in-person meeting. We can come with you to the meeting. You talk about your program, the federal funding you receive, how important the program is, what data, what numbers you have, share stories of the children, youth, and families that you're serving. And then towards usually the end of the meeting, another partner in the meeting can make the ask, can say, and we're asking you to support this legislation or to support this funding level in appropriations. Often like a board member, other community partners can accompany you to make the ask. Also, you can always ask as a private individual, act as a private individual. Because if you're employed at a place that doesn't allow you to lobby, you haven't given up your individual rights as a citizen. So you can make very clear, you know, not as an employee of this, organization or school, but as a private citizen that's a resident of this district or this state. I'm asking you to support or not to support this policy. And then you can just meet to educate, provide information. You can provide information about the importance of a funding stream, how it impacts the children, youth, and families in your community, how important it is, any numbers and data you have, and provide all of that information and stop short of making that ask. And you still would have had a big impact because most legislators and their staff don't know what you know. They're not experts in what you know. They don't know about the issue of children, youth, and family homelessness in their district or in their state. So often you're educating them about a topic and an issue and a solution that they've never heard of before. So reaching out and having that education, advocacy conversation that doesn't include an ask, if you're unable to do that, still has an incredibly powerful and positive impact. And if you do have that advocacy meeting, letting Schoolhouse Connection or National Network for Youth know that you had that meeting, then we can follow up with that congressional office and say, hey, we'd love to talk about specific legislation. So there's definitely a way where partnering with us can have a really positive impact. And next slide, some other common methods of communicating with members of Congress. I've mainly been giving examples around just individual meetings. And like I said, those meetings can be in person or on Zoom. Having Zoom advocacy meetings are very common place these days and definitely something we can help you have. You can host a town hall in a county and a local community and invite the legislator to come to the town hall meeting. We often have service providers or liaisons and young people with lived experience or children, youth, and families there as well. You can send letters, emails, do group sign-on letters, make phone calls, and then definitely social media. You can whatever elected official you want and educate them or lobby them via social media. And now I'm going to pass it to Barbara.
Just a little bit more here, and then we'll open it back up for questions. So one thing to say, you may get emails from organizations, including Schoolhouse or the National Network or others that say, fill out this form. It takes 2 minutes. We say that, right? If you do get those, one thing that's really important to do is to personalize. There's typically a template, and congressional offices, if they see a lot of form letters, it really has to be a lot of form letters to pay attention. But what they pay much more attention to is something that is very specific, that's personalized, has local data, for example. So just a note about if you see those electronic form letters come in. But the other thing we really wanted to share with you to think about and consider, and that we're here to help for, would actually be a site visit. So for example, members of Congress spend a lot of their time back in the district. They return on the weekends, they return during congressional breaks, and going to see a facility, if you're a school district, for example, going to meet with a community partner or have a meeting at an offsite there, or even at a related like school building, for example, can be very, very powerful. And we recently worked with a liaison in a state who did this, and it was the staffers who are literally writing education laws hadn't been in a school in quite a long time. So there's a lot to be said about that, if and working with maybe local advocacy or other partners to do that, but we can help you. So just we want to put that offer out there, that if you're interested in really truly educating members and having them seeing is believing in the community to see the impact of a program, we're happy to help you set that up. And I think We will also want to say that with this particular Congress, all states are important, all districts are important, but there are some states that if you are from, it is particularly important around the issues of children, youth, and families, particularly within early care and education. So Alaska, Louisiana, Maine, Oklahoma, Vermont, Wisconsin, Iowa, and West Virginia are some of the states that will be particularly strategic. So if you are from those states and you're interested in helping to provide information or data or stories or other meetings, we definitely want to hear from you, but we want to hear from you wherever you are because we truly need more basic education on these issues among all congressional offices. And on the next slide, just to let you know that this webinar is really focused on what the 9 days and a sense of what's to come. We're going to get much more into the details. We're going to know a lot more in January. We're going to know who's on the committees. We're going to know what some of the vehicles are. We're going to have actual talking points. So for example, if you're talking to Preserve McKinney-Vento, we'll have some messages that are effective across the aisle to share with you. So stay tuned for an important part 2 of this that'll happen in January. And also in January, we want to call your attention to a new resource, regardless of whether you're in youth services or education or early care. We have interactive data profiles on our website that disaggregate federal data by congressional district as well as by state legislative district. Right now, they have the 21-22 school year data on them. Just a couple weeks ago, the Department of Education released the 22-23 school year data. So we are in the process of updating those, but those can be extremely helpful. You can go to your school district, you can go to your community, your congressional district and say, this is how many children and youth were identified as homeless. Here's where they were staying. Here's the graduation rate. Here's the impact of attendance. So it's a great way to very much localize the data that's available. Every time we've used these in meetings, we see the staffers circle certain numbers. So just know that that'll be updated and coming to you in January as well as a great advocacy tool. More support. You see TJ's face there. So again, please reach out to us. We're really willing to be the go-between and to help set things up or just to answer questions, whatever you need from us. And here's the connection information. And I think Darla has a couple more slides to share before we wrap up and take questions.
Yes, please put your questions in chat or Q&A. We are going to be answering them all. I think we have time, so please don't be shy. But I wanted to make sure you all knew you were invited to attend our 2025 National Summit on Youth Homelessness and Hill Day in Washington, D.C. It's February 27th and 28th. With a new Congress and a new administration, it's now more important than ever to connect with your elected officials, educate them about the important programs that are supporting children, youth, and families experiencing homelessness. Members do get a discount on registration. Right now we're under general registration rates. So we encourage everyone to register before January 20th because then the rates go up quite a bit for late registration. Our friends Schoolhouse Connection always host and sponsor our education track. So there will be a lot of content there for the McKinney-Vento homeless liaisons, those interested in education issues from pre-K to higher ed. And I think we can put yes, there is virtual. So you can either attend in person or you can register to attend virtually. We do live stream the summit as well. And we'll put a link for registration in chat in a couple minutes. Also, like I mentioned at the beginning, we are a membership organization. We do offer a different rate based on the size of your organization. Also, if you're a school district, it's $200 flat fee. And membership goes from January to December every year. If you sign up now, your membership starts now and it'll go through the end of 2025. So with that, we'll open it up for questions and I'll hand it to Barbara to be our MP.
Trinity, if you can go backwards a couple slides to our contact information, and we'll just leave that one on there. Again, the PowerPoint we put in the chat several times, it'll be emailed out to you. What I neglected to mention is SHC has a Slack community as well where we can answer questions real time. So that's another resource that's available to you. But we've got precisely 7 minutes left. So if there are any questions on any of the things that we talked about with respect to the next 9 days between now and December 20th, or questions about some of the things that we sort of give a preview to, we would be happy to take those questions now. And we're also interested in knowing what you need. You know, we see our role as tracking the information, translating the information, making it actionable. But if there's other things that you specifically need to stay abreast and to stay engaged and to stay educating, that would be, we'd like to hear those pieces too. Good feedback for us. Right. Not seeing anything pop up. Okay. Well, you have our email information on the screen. So definitely reach out to us directly. We thank you for your time. Please feel free to reach out about any of these issues, and we will see you in the new year. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.